They say the people closest to you know exactly how to kill you. Slowly, sweetly, with a smile. For the longest time, I thought that was just a dark joke. Now I know it's true. My name is Elena Hart, and 3 months ago, I watched my husband and his sister try to poison me at brunch. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday. Bright morning sun spilling across the kitchen tiles, the smell of cinnamon rolls in the air. My husband Mark had insisted we attend his sister Vanessa's new family brunch tradition. He'd said it like a promise, like he was doing me a favor. Vanessa's been working hard to reconnect. He told, I was always a top father, and she wants to make things right between you two. I'd smiled, but inside, something in me twisted. Vanessa never wanted to reconnect. She wanted to control. I'd seen it for years, the subtle undermining, the sharp compliments that left bruises instead of warmth. She had a way of making me doubt myself, one quiet jab at a time, and lately, it had grown worse. I noticed it first when I started getting sick. Not the kind of sick you can explain away with a bad meal or stress. No, this was deeper. Burning stomach cramps, dizzy spells, fatigue that felt like drowning in your own skin. The first time, Mark blamed the seafood I'd ordered. The second time, he said maybe I was working too hard. By the 5th hospital visit, I stopped asking questions, because every incident had one thing in common. Vanessa had been there. I told myself I was imagining it, that family dynamics were messy, not murderous. But the last time it happened, after a dinner Vanessa had lovingly prepared, I woke up in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and a doctor telling me they'd found trace chemicals in my system. Nothing conclusive, nothing they could identify. Mark squeezed my hand, eyes wide with concern. "Babe," he'd whispered, "it's probably something environmental. Maybe mold or cleaning products." His thumb rubbed over mine gently, too gently, like he was rehearsing sympathy. And when I glanced at his phone later that week, a gut instinct I couldn't explain, I saw her name, Vanessa. "We'll try again next weekend, stronger this time. Make sure she drinks it." I remember staring at those words until the room tilted. Then I took a breath, and I decided to stop being their experiment. The next Sunday, I woke up calm. Colder than I'd ever been, but calm. When Mark kissed my forehead that morning, I smiled like nothing was wrong. When Vanessa texted, "Can't wait to see you both. Got a special roast blend just for Elena," I replied with a heart emoji. Because this time, I'd be ready. Vanessa's house sat on a hill just outside Asheville, North Carolina, all white marble countertops and pretentious calm. The kind of place that looked like it belonged on a real estate ad, all light and laughter, not the site of slow burn murder. She greeted me with her usual too-tight hug and expensive perfume. "Elena," she sang. "You look radiant. Mark said you've been feeling under the weather. I brewed something that'll help my new coffee blend." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. I glanced at Mark, who stood by the counter, already pouring steaming coffee into 2 identical white mugs. "Special roast?" I asked lightly. Vanessa's lips curved. Hand ground, organic, a touch of something extra. Her voice dipped on that last word, extra. I laughed softly, feigning obliviousness. "Sounds lovely." We sat at the dining table, Vanessa opposite me, Mark beside her. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching the gold trim on the cups. But underneath the smell of cinnamon and roasted beans, something metallic crept through, faint but distinct. It was the same scent I'd noticed weeks before, and that's when I knew it wasn't paranoia. I picked up the cup slowly, letting the heat of it bite against my palm. Vanessa's gaze flickered toward Mark. Mark gave a slight nod. They thought I didn't see it, but I did. So I smiled, pretended to check my phone, and murmured, "I should call the client in New York before they board their flight. Do you mind if I use your study?" Vanessa waved dismissively. "Of course, dear. Don't spill the coffee on my carpet." I stood up, stumbled deliberately against the table, and apologized as I reached to steady myself, switching our cups in one smooth motion. "Sorry," I gasped, forcing a laugh. "I'm so clumsy sometimes." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "It's fine, just go before it gets cold." I did straight into her study, where the reflection in the hallway mirror gave me the perfect view of the table. From there, I watched. Mark was scrolling his phone, oblivious. Vanessa picked up my cup, the one meant for me, and took a sip. I felt my heart hammer against my ribs so hard it hurt. My mouth went dry. A few seconds passed. Nothing. Then, her fingers twitched. She blinked, frowned, reached for her water. Mark glanced up. "Messa? You okay?" Her hand trembled. The water glass slipped and shattered. She pressed a palm to her chest, breath stuttering. "Mark," she whispered, "something's wrong." And in that single flicker of panic on his face, I saw the truth. He knew exactly what was wrong. By the time I stepped out of the study, Vanessa was slumped against her chair, trembling violently. Mark was kneeling beside her, horror spreading like ink across his face. Leader boxes, a tribe, and the Discovery Finding Proof microphones. It was fine. Vanessa looked up at me through glassy eyes, realization dawning. "You switched them," she gasped. I tilted my head. "You wanted me to have that coffee, remember?" Her lips parted, breath catching in pain. "You knew..." Mark stood frozen, the mask finally breaking, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small or scared. I felt something sharper. Control. The sirens wailed in the distance. Vanessa tried to speak, but the words tangled. "Mark," you said. He cut her off, voice trembling. "Just stop talking. You're going to be fine." But I'd heard enough. "You said it wouldn't be traced, didn't you?" I asked softly. Mark's eyes snapped to mine wide, terrified. "Elena, please." "No," I said. "Keep going. Tell her what you told me the last time I almost died, that it was probably just something I ate." Vanessa's head lolled to the side. "You idiot," she whispered at him. "It wasn't supposed to kill her, just make her sick." My recording caught everything, every confession, every lie unraveling. And as the paramedics burst through the door, I finally smiled. Because for the first time, they were the ones scrambling to explain. Vanessa was convulsing, Mark was begging, and I was calm. But I wasn't done. Because the truth wasn't just about survival. It was about making sure they paid for every poisoned cup they ever poured. The sound of sirens has a strange rhythm, shrill, distant, like a heartbeat trying to outrun its own guilt. When the paramedics arrived that day, Vanessa was still conscious barely. Mark tried to play the part of the frantic husband, his voice cracking, his hands trembling just enough to look innocent. "Please help her," he shouted, eyes darting between me and the EMTs. She just collapsed." But the moment they asked him what she'd eaten, I saw the flicker of panic in his pupils. She made coffee," he stammered. "For my wife, actually. I didn't think she'd drink it. I didn't have to say a word." The paramedics exchanged a glance, the kind that silently says, "Something's off here." They loaded Vanessa into the ambulance. Mark followed, leaving me alone in that pristine kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee and something bitter clinging to the air. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the mug. 2 white ceramic cups, identical in every way, except one, the faint trace of lipstick on the rim of hers. That tiny pink outline was the difference between my life and her death. And it made me wonder how many times had I already come this close. The next day, a detective came to the house. Detective Harris, late 40s, calm, the kind of man who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. He sat across from me at the dining table, the same spot where Vanessa had nearly died. "Mrs. Hart," he said, flipping open his notepad, "I just need to confirm you believe someone tried to poison you?" I nodded slowly. Not believe, I know. He studied my face. And who do you think that was? My husband, I said, and his sister. His pen stopped mid-word. That's a serious accusation. So is murder, I replied. I showed him my phone, the messages between Mark and Vanessa, the footage I'd recorded from the hallway camera. When he saw a part where Vanessa took the wrong cup, he leaned back, eyebrows raised. Well, he said after a moment, that's new. The investigation started quietly. Toxicology confirmed that the substance in Vanessa's system was a concentrated form of thallium, a heavy metal, colorless, tasteless, once used in rat poison before it was banned. It matched the traces the hospital had found in my blood weeks before. Mark's reaction when the police questioned him was pure theater. Shock, denial, outrage. She's framing me, he yelled. My wife's been unstable for months. She's on medication. She hallucinates. Classic deflection. But Harris wasn't buying it. He'd seen the footage, the texts, the smirk that flickered across Mark's face when he thought no one was looking. For days, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the glass felt like a ghost walking through the halls. But under the fear was something else, clarity. When you've been poisoned, you learn to recognize toxins in every form, even the human kind. I started piecing together the pattern, the business trips that always coincided with Vanessa's visits, the way Mark insisted on making me tea after every argument, the subtle replacement of our pantry items, same labels, slightly different textures. He'd been doing it for months, maybe longer, and the more I thought about it, the more one question clawed at me. Why? The answer came from an unexpected place, our insurance agent. 2 weeks after Vanessa's hospitalization, I got a call. Mrs. Hart, the man said, just confirming the update request your husband made to your joint policy. It's quite recent. My pulse skipped. What? Update. He hesitated. Well, he increased the payout to $2 million and listed himself as sole beneficiary. I felt the world tilt again, that dizzy, sickening spin of betrayal, so deep it almost felt physical. $2 million, that was the price of my life, a number my husband had put on my head. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor with the folder of evidence I'd collected, the texts, the hospital reports, the insurance call transcript, and for the first time I didn't cry. I planned. When Detective Harris called to say the DA wanted to move forward with charges, I asked him to wait. Wait? He repeated, confused. Ma'am, this is attempted murder. We can't. You can, I said. Just give me a week. He sighed. You want to get him yourself, don't you? I met his gaze. I want him to feel what I felt. Powerless, exposed, trapped. He studied me for a long moment before nodding. 1 week. Don't do anything stupid. I smiled. Detective, stupid is what almost got me killed. Over the next few days, I played the perfect wife again. I cooked dinner. They asked out his work. I let him think everything was back to normal. Mark had always been good at pretending, but not as good as me. Every night, while he slept, I slipped out of bed and set things in motion. I uploaded the recordings, synced every document to a cloud drive, and scheduled an anonymous email to every one of his business partners. The insurance papers, the text logs, everything. The message would send automatically the moment the police arrested him. But that wasn't enough. He needed to see it crumble. So I invited him to dinner. Just the two of us. Maybe we could start fresh, I said softly over the phone. Put everything behind us. There was a pause on the other end. Then his voice cautious, intrigued. You mean it? I smiled. Completely. He agreed instantly. Of course he did. Greed makes men predictable. That night, I wore his favorite dress, cooked his favorite meal, poured his favorite wine from the same bottle he'd once used to slip something bitter into mine. When he arrived, he looked nervous but smug, like a gambler who thought the odds were finally back in his favor. He raised his glass. To second chances. I met his eyes. To closure. He smiled. I did too. And then I told him the truth. I know about the insurance, Mark. His hand froze midair. I know about the text with Vanessa, the poison, the plan. He laughed, a shaky, hollow sound. Elena, come on. You're twisting things. I tilted my head. Really? Because the police don't think so. Neither does the toxicology report. His face strained of color. What did you do? I leaned forward, my voice a whisper. What you never expected. I learned to play your game better than you. For a moment, he just stared, the realization settling in. Slow and suffocating. Then came the pounding at the door. Police lights flickering through the window. And that was when I stood, picked up my glass, and took a long, deliberate sip. He thought I wanted revenge, but revenge was too small. I wanted him to taste the same helplessness I'd felt, one sip at a time. The red and blue lights painted the kitchen in sharp, pulsing strokes. Through the window I could see shadows moving. Uniforms, the curve of someone's shoulders, the bulk of a stretcher where Vanessa had been carried from the house. In that cold, flickering light, Mark looked very small. Detective Harris stepped inside, removing his hat like he was shedding a layer of fiction. Mrs. Hart, he said quietly, we've got enough to place him under arrest. He'll be charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. Do you want to be present? I thought of the hospital smell, the antiseptic tang that had seemed to cling to me for weeks. I thought of the hospital bed, the IV line, the way the nurse had frowned at the toxicology report. I thought of the insurance man, of 2 million reasons to want me gone. Yes, I said. I want to be there. They handcuffed him in the living room, the metal cold and final. He didn't scream. He tried to bargain like any man with a reputation, promises, half-truths, the offer to help the investigation. But the handcuffs and the clipboarded officers were a kind of language he couldn't charm. His world narrowed to the size of a booking form. As they let him past me, his eyes met mine for the first time without the practiced warmth I'd been used to. In them, I saw something like regret, or maybe fear. He mouthed a single word, Elena. I folded the word like paper and put it in my pocket for later. The cameras arrived within an hour. Cameras always arrive fast when a person of any public note is accused of something that smells like scandal. Reporters lined the driveway like vultures in press suits. Someone shouted a question about motive. Someone else asked if I, the betrayed wife, would press for the maximum. I stepped onto the porch with my coat still buttoned, the night air cutting my cheeks pink. I felt absurdly composed. Adrenaline had flattened into a kind of bitter clarity. Mrs. Hart, a woman with a microphone, asked me, leaning forward until I could see her lipstick on the phone. Any comment on allegations the two of you altered household items to poison her? Vanessa's name sounded foreign in that reporter's tone, like a headline, not a human being. I paused, choosing each syllable. Yes, I said. There's a long list of things I could say, but the police have the evidence, and Vanessa's in their care. My only comment is this. Please don't mistake ordinary hospitality for innocence. It was measured, it was public, and the cameras ate it. The arrest sent a shockwave through our neighborhood, then into the circuit of our friends, our family, the office where Mark worked. Text messages poured in, some supportive, some venomous, some thinly veiled congratulations, masquerading as curiosity. My phone became a chorus of other people's astonishment. At home, in the months after the arrest, everything changed shape. The dining table where we'd shared recipes became an evidence table. Detectives moved like tide pools, picking up crumbs and examining them for history. Harris allowed me to sit in on interviews. He said it helped him to have the victim at his side, solid and remembering. I watched Mark's face on the TV as the news channels ran looped footage, the handcuffs, the police cruiser, the slow tilt of his head. Friends called, then stopped calling. Neighbors looked away. His mother left a single card at my door with a message that read, "I cannot understand. I am so sorry." It was the kind of mourning that felt directed more at the collapse of story than at pain. The DA's office moved faster than I expected. Maybe they had resources. Maybe the evidence was finally clean enough to cut through their usual red tape. The initial indictment was brutal in its economy. Conspiracy to commit assault with a deadly weapon, possession and distribution of a toxicant, insurance fraud. The words on a prosecutor's sheet have a particular weight. They sounded like ledger entries, cold, clean, irreversible. The pretrial hearings were a theater of small cruelties. Mark tried to smear me with insinuations that I was unstable, that I had a motive to invent, that my health issues were self-inflicted for attention. It was the same script he'd used privately when he needed to redirect sympathy. But this time the script didn't hold. The recording from the day of the brunch, the camera in the hall that had captured Vanessa's sip in the stutter of her hand, was airless. I remember sitting at the defense table across from Mark the day his lawyer tried to tender an alternate theory that Vanessa had contaminated her own cup in an attempt to frame Mark, that I had orchestrated false evidence. The attorney's voice was oily, practiced, but when he suggested I had staged the event, the judge's face tightened like a fist. "You'll have your chance to call witnesses," the judge said, voice even, "but this court will not be used for the manufacture of sensational fiction." Those words felt like a benediction. The trial itself was slow, deliberate, made of small gears that turned with the grind of paper and testimony. The DA called toxicologists who explained thallium in sentences that made it feel both clinical and obscene. They explained ingestion rates and symptom timelines. They explained how a substance so tasteless and colorless could behave like an eraser on the human body. One witness testified about an odd purchase, a vial of a chemical precursor bought with a credit card linked to Vanessa's account. Another brought forward surveillance footage from a hardware store in town where a woman matching Vanessa's build and coat had bought a nondescript container. Another, a lab analyst, pointed to a tiny scrape on the rim of the cup, a fragment under a fingernail that matched rare chemical storage. The courtroom was a string of small, ugly truths that together formed a rope. And then came the clincher. Mark's sister, Vanessa, who had survived and come out of the woods crawling, took the stand. She was gaunt, her hands shaking like brittle paper. But when she spoke, she did so with a voice that was both confession and plea. "I didn't mean for it to go so far," she said. "We just wanted her sick. I didn't think she'd end up in the hospital." Her testimony was a furnace. The way she said "we" and "I" made the collapse feel intimate and monstrous. Mark's face in the defendant's box went pale. His lawyer mouthed something desperate. The jury watched, and the jury understood. Outside the courthouse, when the verdict was announced, a crowd had gathered. I stood to the side, Detective Harris beside me. I felt the afternoon try to warm the air, but there was a frost in everything now. The foreman read the decision slow as prayer. Guilty on attempted murder. Guilty on conspiracy. Guilty on attempted poisoning. Gasps, sobs, the murmur of cameras. Mark's jaw collapsed. He shook. He tried to shout something. An apology, a denial. The microphone swallowed him. He was taken away in handcuffs again, this time with the weight of verdict upon him. I wanted him to look at me as they led him away. I wanted him to understand fully. He did. His eyes met mine, not the fear I'd once seen, but something thinner. Recognition. The resignation that comes when a man realizes his map has burned. But conviction is not the end of the story. It is a hinge. The real work, the reward of justice, often stretches beyond the criminal docket into the slow work of repair. Within days of the verdict, The insurance company sent a team of investigators. They had the court record and the transcripts, but insurance law is a different terrain, contractual, procedural, laced with its own defenses. Mark's legal counsel, desperate now, tried to argue that the increased policy was made under duress or that changes were improperly processed. I produced records, the email confirmations, the date-stamped forms, the bank transfers that matched his signature and his timestamps. The paper trail was an accomplice to truth. Weeks later, a letter arrived. The company would honor the policy, but only after legal mediation and proof of intent. They needed the criminal finding to be firm. The final settlement would be a civil negotiation. It would take months, even years. Money would not bring back what could have been taken. It would buffer the edges of a life left raw. I accepted that. I wanted something else too, not money, but the registry of truth. I wanted the record to say, plainly, what had been done to me. I wanted Vanessa's name to be visible as an accomplice, not as a victim of some private madness that could be whispered away. The court had done part of that. The rest I would do in quieter, sharper ways. So I started to tell the story not in the cacophony of cable pundits, but in the slow power of written words. I wrote pages after pages of what happened, what it felt like to wake with a metallic taste and no explanation. The helplessness of being told you're imagining it. I submitted op-eds about domestic betrayal, about the economics of attempted murder, and how greed dresses itself as pragmatism. I sat for interviews, but I chose them carefully. Local papers, investigative podcasts, a magazine that covered law and consequence. Every telling was precise. I was not performing for sympathy. I was constructing a ledger, public statements that could not be unwritten, testimonies recorded in ink and pixels. Mark, meanwhile, lost access to almost everything that had made his life easy. His business partners wrote terse letters of disassociation. His mother stopped answering her phone. Vanessa, from the hospital bed and then through outpatient rehab, sent notes that were at once apologetic and broken. She would live with her decision. She would carry the knowledge of what she had ordered and helped serve. But in the quiet that follows such storms, I found something I did not expect, a certain lightness. Truth simplifies life in the strangest way. Where before I had run small calculations, avoid, appease, explain, now the arithmetic was simple. He had chosen, and I had survived. The jury had spoken. The law had marked them guilty. But justice, I realized, is often modular criminal verdicts, civil reckoning, and the slow work of reclaiming a life. And I still had one last move, the public reckoning and the civil closure that would make their names synonymous with consequence. Would I take it, or would I walk away? There's a stillness that only comes after a storm, not silence exactly, but the absence of struggle. For the first time in months, I could breathe without tasting metal. Mark was behind bars. Vanessa was recovering in a state-run facility under protective supervision. The news had moved on to fresher scandals. But justice, I discovered, doesn't end with headlines. It ends when the story belongs to you again, when the people who stole your peace can no longer rewrite what happened. That part was mine to finish. 3 weeks after the verdict, my attorney Rachel Porter called me. "They're ready to settle," she said. "Who?" "The insurance company," she replied. "Apparently your husband's legal team tried to withdraw the policy before his conviction. The judge froze the assets. You're entitled to the payout, all of it." I blinked. "You're saying I get the money?" Rachel chuckled. "Every penny, with interest. But there's one catch. They want to avoid publicity. They're asking you to sign a non-disclosure agreement." The irony almost made me laugh. After months of being gaslit, poisoned, and manipulated, now they wanted me silent again. "Send them my counteroffer," I said. "I'll sign if they agree to one condition." "And what's that?" "I want the check issued in my full name, Elena Hart. And I want it dated on the 1-year anniversary of the first hospital report, the day they tried to erase me." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "That's poetic, Elena. You'll have it. When the payment cleared, I didn't buy anything extravagant. I didn't travel, didn't move, didn't run away. I stayed, because staying is its own kind of revenge. They had both wanted me gone, out of the way, forgotten. So I lived, right where they'd expected my obituary to be printed. Spring came late that year, the air soft and forgiving. I went back to work part-time at the Loda Library, a quiet job, surrounded by paper and people who valued truth. Some days, I'd see my story referenced in psychology journals or law articles. Case study, the heart poisoning attempt. The phrasing made it sound distant, clinical. But I didn't mind. It meant my pain had become data, evidence that could help someone else recognize the warning signs I'd ignored. And that, in its own strange way, was healing. Then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, just a folded piece of paper inside an old greeting card that smelled faintly of antiseptic. The handwriting was shaky. Vanessa. Elena, I don't expect forgiveness. I think about that morning every day. Mark told me it would only make you weak, not kill you. I believed him. That's what makes me worse. I hope you build something from the ruins. I can't undo what I did, but maybe you can make it mean something. There was no self-pity in it, no excuses. Just a kind of broken honesty. I read it twice. Then I set it down beside the court documents and the insurance settlement letter. 3 pieces of paper, 3 ghosts. Each one proof that the truth had survived them all. A few months later, a journalist from the Atlantic Review called. He wanted to feature my story in a special edition on justice and survival. I don't want sympathy pieces, I told him. He laughed. Good, I don't write those. He asked for one quote to close the article, something I'd tell someone going through their own version of betrayal. I thought for a long time before I answered. Tell them, I said slowly, that sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it just whispers, I'm still here. The article went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it was measured. People weren't fascinated by the poison or the crime. Each treatment were re-sensitive. She said, nothing and nothing. You reminded me that silence isn't weakness. And that's when I realized something. Revenge had transformed. It wasn't about making them suffer anymore. It was about reclaiming the narrative, one that no longer belonged to the villain, but to the survivor. My revenge had become an education. And every time someone read it, every time a woman somewhere recognized her own warning signs, the story rewrote itself again, this time in their favor. That's the kind of vengeance that never fades. 1 year later, I visited Vanessa's grave. She died quietly in her sleep, the doctor said. Heart failure from the long-term damage of the poison she'd ingested. Poetic, in a cruel way. The toxin she'd intended for me had taken her instead, slowly, inevitably, like the kind of truth that can't be buried forever. I stood there for a long time, the wind cold on my face. I forgive you, I said finally, voice steady. But not because you deserve it, because I do. And with that, I turned and walked away. At home, I poured myself a cup of coffee, real coffee, not the kind brewed from betrayal. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and honest. I sat at the same table where it all began, sunlight spilling across the wood, and wrote the final sentence of my memoir. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't survival, it's serenity. Then I closed the notebook, exhaled, and smiled. Because for the first time in years, the taste on my tongue wasn't bitter. It was peace. They tried to erase me with poison, but poison only works if it stays hidden. When you drag deceit into the light, it burns itself out. I used to think revenge meant watching them fall. Now I know better. It means standing tall in the silence they left behind, unshaken, unafraid, and entirely your own. Because survival is not the opposite of revenge. It is revenge. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who smiled while they hurt you, remember this. The calmest people often carry the sharpest justice. Like, share, and subscribe for more true-to-life revenge stories where peace isn't given, it's earned.